Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the October 2021 Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on the cybersecurity self-assessment. Today, we're going to explore your risk assessment and cybersecurity preparedness options based on our just released cybersecurity self-assessment, which you can find on our website and which we will be sending a link out to shortly. This self-assessment will help nonprofit organizations document their cybersecurity readiness. My name is Johan Hammerstrom, and I'm the CEO of Community IT and the moderator for this webinar series. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome our Chief Technology Officer, cybersecurity expert, and resident thought leader in the area of nonprofit cybersecurity, Matthew Eshelman. Good afternoon, Matt.
Hey, good afternoon, Johan. Thanks for the intro. So if you've been hanging with me so far and you've checked everything off and you're doing great, congratulations. That's really great. I think that, cybersecurity is really about fundamentals. And so once you have those fundamentals in place, then you can move into additional controls that will provide protection, and an additional layer of protection for your organization. So in cybersecurity, it really is the weakest link is exploited. And so it's important to invest in the basics before spending money on tools or consulting or services that may not provide much of a return on your investment. So where we see, again, value associated with those next steps. So again, if you've already done all that stuff that we've talked about so far, that's fantastic. Once you've gone and implemented all of that, then it may be helpful for your organization to have some sort of an external assessment. And again, there can be different kinds of assessments depending on what your primary concern is. From a terminology perspective, you could get kind of a gap analysis from the policy side, where you could have an organization come in and maybe score you against those critical security controls that say, hey, this control says you need to do this. How are you meeting it? So again, that could be a policy assessment. At Community IT, we do that. We also do a technical review. We're actually logging into systems, looking at your Office 365 configuration, looking at the Google configuration. Are the backups in place? How's multi-factor implemented? Are you using modern authentication? Kind of doing a full technical review of the system. Or you may also need to do a pen test. So a pen test is kind of a specific type of security scan, where often a vendor will put an appliance on your network. They'll run some scanning to identify, are there vulnerable systems on your network? Are there open ports? Are there systems that need patched? Maybe that it's not a server, it's your network, but investing in those elements can provide some additional insight into gaps in your current deployment plan. You may want to invest in an endpoint detection and response tool. So again, antivirus is kind of table stakes. EDR is kind of the new buzzword. I think XDR is the newest acronym to be aware of, but these are higher end tools. It's what we run at Community IT that can detect not only kind of your traditional malware and viruses, but these new, what are called fileless attacks. So again, it could be like a script, it could be some PowerShell that's running. And so this is where a lot of the adversaries are moving to, is that they're running to these fileless attacks because they're harder to detect. And so you need to have a more sophisticated tool that's able to both identify, detect, and then block these systems. And then the final piece here that may be helpful is to have more of a unified monitoring and management platform. So again, because we move things to the cloud, we have all these disparate systems. And so instead of just looking at the server to look at who's logging in and what's being accessed. Now you have audit logs you need to look at. For email, maybe you have a separate file system, you have a separate CRM. All these systems have maybe different usernames and passwords to log into, and so it's hard to really get a single view of those. So there are systems that allow you to integrate the logging data from all those different tools into a central place, and so you can do some event log correlation. So you can see, oh, I see this user, they logged in, they accessed email, they logged in, they accessed the CRM, and all of that's expected. Or it could also help to raise some flags and provide that analysis in a single pane of glass. So again, those unified monitoring management tools, I think, are going to become more common. And I'm also happy to see that they're also more affordable as well. So specifically with Microsoft, that's something with their Microsoft Cloud App Security is included as part of an E5 license. And I've been very impressed with how it works and how it aggregates not only security logs from the Microsoft tools, but then also third-party applications as well. So are there any questions that have come in so far that we can answer, or we can just continue on into talking about some of the implementations and road mapping?
Yeah, excuse me. There are a few questions, but I think it makes sense to save them for the end. If you want to keep going, we can get to those questions at the end.
So I think with all this, we would be remiss to talk about implementing any change at an organization without understanding the impact that your organization's culture has on all of this. So I think understanding your organization's tolerance for risk and what needs to be protected in the context of what can be allowed is really important. And so each organization is different. The technology tools may all be the same, but how they're implemented can be vastly different. And so we have organizations that tend to be very competitive, and so they really want to know in the security awareness training, like, how many people are clicking on those messages, who is it, and so they've made it into a game. We have other organizations that are maybe a little bit more reserved, and so they want to handle that kind of thing a little bit more privately. And so the same thing goes in terms of device access. Is your organization, did you make the shift to work from home reluctantly, or were you already in a pretty good place to allow people to work remotely in terms of providing laptops and cloud access to systems? Or was it a very traditional, come into the office, work on your desktop computer, and that was the mentality? So again, I think the impact of how your organization's culture really does continue to flow into how you're protecting the organization from a cybersecurity perspective. So again, each organization needs to navigate the implementation of those controls within their own operating framework. So kind of distilling this down to, if you were to the top 3 controls on the technology side, or the assessment side, is that multi-factor authentication is the number one thing. If I talked about policy a lot, talked about the importance of it, but at the end of the day, if you only have kind of the capacity to implement one thing, it really needs to be multi-factor authentication. We see that being the biggest risk area because if an account is compromised, that has such a significant cascade of negative consequences. And so we need to really protect those digital identities and turn on multi-factor authentication. And it needs to be turned on for everything. And so if you're everything you have is in Google Workspace, great. If everything you have is in Office 365, great. But most organizations don't have all their data in just one system. So every system where you have important information needs to be protected by multi-factor authentication. So the good news is that it is included with most cloud applications. So it's not something you have to pay extra for typically. If you're big enough, and that's kind of could be a subjective term, but again, you could turn on some additional features through enterprise mobility and security. Now this is on the Microsoft side to upgrade to conditional access and turn on single sign-on. So again, instead of turning on, password policies and multi-factor authentication for Office 365 and Salesforce and Bamboo, you can just turn it on one time and run everybody through the Office 365 portal so that you've got one place to manage access. You have one set of passwords to deal with. You have one MFA challenge to deal with. And so that's very efficient. So multi-factor authentication should be the number one thing on your list if you haven't done that already. After that, I do think security awareness training is a very important step to take. There are lots of options out there. We've already talked about it. So again, if you're just getting started, there's lots of free resources that you can use. We have an online training available that's on our YouTube channel. I was able to partner with TechSoup and do a 101 and a 201 cybersecurity training course for them. And so those are great kind of one-offs that you can use. If you're able to, I would really encourage the investment in a security awareness training platform like KnowBe4. There's others out there. It's not that expensive, $20 a user, for the year for the license. And I think the real value is that kind of the training, but then the ongoing testing and evaluation. So again, you have a better sense of what's going on. And then the final technology tool I think that, is really important to implement is around business email compromise protection. So we'll provide some additional detail later, but as I said, most threats are coming from email. And so the technology tools associated with this have needed to catch up. And so traditional spam filtering is okay against blocking unwanted messages, but it hasn't been doing a very good job in blocking these confidence scams, things with malicious links in them. And so having a dedicated tool to work on business email compromises is really, we get a lot of mileage out of that. People can ignore the spam message in their inbox, but it's really hard for them to ignore the email that looks like it's coming from their executive director or their finance person, to click on this link to share something. And so business email compromise protection really focuses on identifying those messages and then removing them from the inbox. So again, the other thing that we like about them, particularly the Barracuda tool that we use, is that it provides some additional alerting. So again, if an account does look like it's been compromised, it will also provide alerting on that. So again, for all those things, getting visibility into what's going on in your network is key. And so some of these tools like Barracuda Sentinel are great for blocking spear phishing messages, also raising flags if things like new mailbox rules are created, or if there's a suspicious login. And so that generates an alert, and then you're able to respond to that when you get it. So talking specifically about why MFA, we can see how effective it is. So what we're recommending for MFA, and again, another plug for our video, is that we do have an enrollment video. It's like 10 minutes long that walks you through how to turn on multi-factor authentication in your organization and using the on-device prompt. So again, multi-factor authentication is something that you know, which is your password, along with something you have, like a smartphone. And so those on-device prompts where you log in, your phone buzzes from the Authenticator app, is 100% effective against those automated bot attacks. So that's the best method that we recommend implementing whenever you're going to make this change. You want to get people on, you want people to use the platform in the right way. So multi-factor authentication is extremely effective. And then cybersecurity awareness training is also extremely effective. So this is some information from the vendor that we use in terms of KnowBe4. And these are real numbers. And these are real numbers that we see. Whenever we do baseline phishing tests for a new organization, we will see up to 40% of people clicking on links and emails. I mean, it's unbelievable. You would be surprised what people click on. But the good news is is that after that initial baseline and you do that major training, and maybe after you do quarterly trainings, the click-through rate really does decline and decline significantly. Now, what we've seen is that it typically never ever goes away. Somebody always clicks on something because they're curious, but going from 40% of your staff clicking on things to 4% is a really good return. And so this is data that was taken from KnowBe4, and they did an industry benchmarking study across 4 million users, 17,000 organizations. And so this is the data that they came up with. And this is something that would, we echo their experience in terms of very high initial click rates and then significantly reduced click rates after training. So again, training needs to be ongoing, needs to be consistent. And then we also have the note here, some supporting information around how business email compromise works. And so this is a graphic from the FBI, where they are very concerned about this because of the financial impact. So again, we can see this as well. These confidence-based schemes that start via email can be very expensive to organizations, and they're very difficult to defend against because there's often not much content in the messages, so spam filters are often not able to catch it. And so we're reliant on either really sophisticated tools to try to block it, or staff being able to identify that it's malicious or something is off, and then also having good processes in place for organizations, if and when they need to change payment information. So again, business email compromise is a significant threat, and having a technology tool in place to help prevent it is provides a lot of protection. So as we transition from this kind of laundry list of things to do, and maybe you already know that you need to do that, I think it's really important to engage the organization's leadership and impress on them that all organizations are vulnerable. So again, hacking isn't something that just happens to the big organizations with big IT teams. This is something that happens to organizations no matter what their size. So, and that poor cybersecurity is an organizational liability. And so we have seen that where if your organization has not implemented multi-factor authentication, you are very likely going to have an account compromise. So, the data that we saw from last year, 96% of the account compromise tickets that we responded to were for staff that had not implemented MFA. And so it's really stark whenever we see those numbers that, if you have multi-factor authentication, you're in good shape. It's very unlikely you'll get compromised. If you don't have multi-factor authentication in place, then it's very likely that your account would be compromised, or maybe not yours, but somebody at your organization's. And I think finally, it does require leadership to say yes. And so for these changes, these are organizational changes. And so for multi-factor to be effective, for security awareness training to be effective, somebody at the executive level needs to say, this is important, we're making it a priority, we're going to devote time at our staff meeting for this. It can't be IT pushing it through because it's not going to get the adoption that it needs to. So the organization's leadership really needs to identify this as a priority and include it kind of at that all staff level. It could be driven from the bottom up. I mean, IT can certainly initiate it and it be successful. We've also seen it come from the top down. The board says this needs to happen, and then it occurs that way. So again, there's not necessarily one right way to do it, but the key factor of success is really for leadership to make it a priority. And in terms of how do you do that, again, your organizational culture really comes into this a lot. I would say you need to schedule time for security. It needs to be part of your regular rhythm. So it's not an afterthought. It could be monthly reporting that you're going to go do with your executive team. It could be quarterly planning with your IT partner to identify what do we need to focus on, what are the threats that we're seeing, how's the security awareness training going. In terms of how that gets communicated, I really think it comes back to knowing your audience. What is the most effective? Is it a narrative? Is it stories? Hey, this other organization that we work with, they got hacked, and here's why they got hacked, and here's why we need to make this change. Or are they more impressed by metrics and numbers? Is it hey, it's going to cost us $6,000 more for our cyber liability insurance because we haven't implemented MFA? How are we going to address that? A breach is going to cost $150,000 once we get through. How are we going to address that? And then I think it's also an opportunity to leverage existing compliance requirements to do some of these things. As an organization, if you are receiving any sort of donation, then PCI compliance would be applicable here. If you're a healthcare provider, then HIPAA would be appropriate. If you're dealing with European data subjects, then GDPR may drive some of that compliance as well. So again, understanding those external factors can help get some additional traction to implement these initiatives. So in terms of next steps, if you haven't taken the assessment survey, I would encourage you to go ahead and do that and review those results. You'll get a little email with the questions and then your responses, so you can use that, print it out, check it off of what you need to focus on. And I would say prioritize one control to implement. It can be really daunting to get these assessment reports where it seems like there's so much work to be done, but you just need to take a bite, take a step. And so pick one new control to implement. If you haven't implemented multi-factor authentication already, make that the first step. If you've already implemented MFA, but maybe you haven't done training, maybe go ahead and start with a training plan. So again, pick a control, implement it, and then you got to really plan. Again, get time on the all staff meeting to say, this is a priority. We're going to talk about multi-factor authentication, or we're going to talk about security awareness training. So really make it intentional, and then you'll be able to execute and get through those roadmaps. So great. Well, I think we have a couple minutes here for questions, and so I'll be happy to respond to anything that's kind of popped up throughout this presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That was fantastic. Great summary and overview of cybersecurity, which I've been thinking about for a long time and have heard about many times, but I feel like I always learn something new in these presentations. We do have a few questions. If you do have any questions, please you can chat them in or use the Q&A utility to ask your question. So if money is no object, what does best-in-class protection look like? What are some specific examples you can provide? What would you suggest? Someone who's got a blank check to write on security protection, what should they do?
Yeah, well, I think once you get the policy work done, I think, and out of the way, I would really make sure that you've got good tools in place. I think on the device protection side. So again, for us, community IT, and I think we work really hard to get best in class. We may not have a complete blank check, but we invest a lot in our security. And so for us, that means we're doing all managed devices. So again, staff have managed computers. We're doing client-side encryption. We have SentinelOne Complete, which is a high-end EDR tool in place on our systems. And then all of that information feeds up into our managed cloud app security portal. So again, we have alerting and management and monitoring that comes from the tools that we use. We've been really intentional around any privileged system that we have access to, includes multi-factor authentication. Most of that is driven through our single sign-on portal. We happen to use Microsoft's enterprise applications, which is included in Office 365. But we've also supported organizations that use Okta or OneLogin. So again, there may be some reasons to invest in that. And then again, investing in training and education and awareness for your staff is important. And then I think the final piece, once you've got, again, the policy, the device protections, backups of those critical systems, server failover, all of those things in place, which we do, then you can start looking at those external assessments where you can get a third-party view. Because even as you have really, invested a lot in those internal controls, it's likely that you've missed some things. And so getting somebody to look at that system with fresh eyes and investing in gap analysis or a technical assessment or even a pen test can be really helpful to get that view. So again, we use a laundry list of technologies at Community IT. So we're all in Barracuda, kind of all of their cloud protections, spam filtering, spear phishing, backups, the SentinelOne tools, the Microsoft suite. We've got a lot of protections in place, and I think that gives us the insight and reporting that we need, given the level of work that we do.
Great, thank you, Matt. We have another question from an organization that that relies on volunteers. These volunteers are spread out throughout the country. They're using their own personal laptops to do the work. What sorts of protections might you recommend for them? And maybe more importantly, any suggestions for how to train those volunteers on cybersecurity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'd be important to implement those security controls in terms of the systems that they can access. So again, some of those data protection policies in terms of what we call like least privileged access. So again, make sure that you've got volunteers that only have access to the information they need to do their job. So again, that may mean if you're collecting information about various constituents, volunteers are using that information. Maybe the volunteer, they don't need to know their birth date, or they don't need to know their address to deliver service. And so you can make that restricted. And so the volunteer has their name, maybe their phone number as a way to identify somebody, but they don't have access to additional personally identifiable information. So again, understanding what information people need to do their work, and then only providing that level of information would be, I think, an important step. Again, depending on the type of data you have, if you're just delivering all of that through a web browser, and you can put in some controls, so that they maybe can't export data, or there's limited opportunities for them to download something on a personal device that you don't control, would be good. And then I don't think it would necessarily be out of line to expect volunteers to go through some basic training on good cybersecurity practices, particularly if it involves creating an email account at your organization for them. And I think this is one area where we see organizations get a little bit casual and saying, oh, well, this person only is a volunteer, or we just need to create an email account from them. But I think recognizing that any account that can be logged into from the web is potentially vulnerable. And again, if it is associated with your organization's domain, that email address is potentially valuable, because it could be used then to target other people. And I think that's the real risk. So again, only provide people access to the information that they need. If you can, turn on multi-factor authentication for those systems, particularly if they have sensitive information, and then have consistent policies and follow through, I think would be important steps to take.
Great, thank you, Matt. Well, I think we have just about reached our time limit for today's webinar. We do want to let you know about next month's webinar. We're not going to be talking about cybersecurity. I know we've done a lot of that this year, and we wanted to finish strong this month, since October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And next month, we are going to be talking about best practices for Mac support. We know that many of you probably use Macs or have staff that use Apple Mac computers. We manage over 600 Macs. It's probably 10% of our install base. It's a significant number. And those of you who use Macs or manage Macs know that they're a little bit different, and they require a special approach. It can be done well. It is possible to use Macs on an enterprise basis, and we're going to be going into a pretty deep dive in November to go over that, provide you with some tips and tricks on things you can do to manage your Macs. So I'm very excited about it. I'm looking forward to attending that webinar. And that will be Wednesday, November 17th, right before the holidays at 3 o'clock. So keep an eye out for that announcement, and we encourage you to register for that webinar. Thank you very much for your time today. We will be sending you an email with a summary of all the resource links that we chatted out today, as well as a link to the recording of today's webinar. Wish you all a great afternoon and a pleasant rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.